where are likely to be zones that are going to get drier, where are likely to be zones that are likely to see severe weather impacts like flooding, coastal erosion. And then it takes into account as to how much money does the government have to try and address these. And that's why really the African continent is mostly affected. Well, one, because the tropical zone is likely to get a lot wetter and the dry zone is likely to get a lot drier. And because in Africa, the budgets to address this are a lot lower than in other countries. So while Europe and the US, has contributed to most of the climate change because they've been emitting most emissions, they have the budget that if, excuse my French, if it gets really bad, they can just pay for it, right? Like Amsterdam is under the sea level, but they've created a whole water system that allows Amsterdam to exist as it exists today. If that wouldn't be there, Amsterdam wouldn't exist. So this takes both into account the impacts and then how much money do you have to address it. And this is why, while I agree with you that the West should be responsible to pay for most of this, you guys need to care about it because you're going to be the guys that are going to be most affected.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In that map,
yeah.
If you include the dependency on climate economies,
yeah.
How would it change?
So this includes, I think this includes like agriculture, the impacts on agriculture. Is that your question?
Yes.
Yes. Because one of the big issues, as you rightly point out, in Africa is that crops will be affected by climate change. If you have changing rainfalls, crops will be affected. This is a map. This is a bit confusing, but essentially it tries to outline what the major risks are for the different continents under different degree scenarios. And this is low, and then it goes to high. And in Africa, the ones that have been primarily identified was that climate change can lead to agricultural issues, like you rightly pointed out, to health issues. So if you have different climate events, you first have nutritional issues, right, if you don't have access to food, and diseases like malaria may expand due to changing weather. And also water issues, which is the drought. This just shows you where CO2 emissions come from. 76. So greenhouse gases are CO2 and CH4. Those are the two. Methane are the two primarily ones. CO2 is primarily coal from energy production, gas from energy production, and oil from the transport sector. And methane is primarily from agriculture. Yeah? Note that how much CO2 is contained in different fossil fuels changes. So here you see, for example, that coal has double the CO2 content of oil, which again, gas has about, coal has about double the CO2 content from gas. So here is crude oil, 645. Here's gas, 335. And coal, 80. No, this one, 945. So that's more or less to give you a rough indication of how much CO2 is. That's why people say we should move to gas from coal. It's because it has a lot more CO2, a lot less CO2. But it still has CO2 in it, right? And then on the left, you see the different oils also have different CO2 content. So you have the Indonesian duri, which is a type of oil that has a lot more CO2 in it than the Qatar Durkan. I don't think they've done these analyses for Uganda or for your oils. And the way that it's divided up is that the first batch is how much CO2 or GHG emission it takes to get the oil out. The next one is how much it takes to process it, and the last one is how much it emits when you consume it. So what are governments doing? Well, they haven't done very much since 1825, but you may be aware of the Paris Agreement, where all countries committed to try and keep global warming between 1.5 and 2%. And all countries signed up, and the United States pulled out. But other than that, everyone is still committed to this agreement. And there's the US in a baby chair. They're playing hard to get. And the way that countries are signing up or trying to show what they want to do is by, first, they submitted intended national determined contributions, which is essentially are just plans that say, this is what we plan to do over the next years. What do they contain? They contain how much emissions you want to deduct, what your mitigation actions will be, and then it also has a component as to how the developed countries are going to support developing countries in this transition. So there is an, if you like, equity component to the Paris Agreement that clearly states that developed countries should support developing countries in this transition. So here are the NDCs of your countries. And I just copied out some texts that I thought were interesting. So Kenya, costs are estimated that over 40 billion is required for mitigation and adaptation actions across the sectors up to 2030. What is your budget in Kenya?
Annual budget?
Yeah? More or less.
30 billion.
30 billion. Okay, so this figure is more than your budget. This is what you wrote up.
This one is up to 2030.
Yeah. So then you divide it by what? By 12, and you have to put aside that much of your annual budget for adaptation, in theory. And then you can look at your budget for the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and see how this goes up.
Is it 14 billion or 4 billion?
14 billion. I copied this out of your documents. This is not me.
I think it was a typo. I say 4 billion.
Yeah. This is Uganda. Costs. And look at these costs. They're even crazier. 270 to 332 billion between 2010 and 2050. Okay, you have 20 more years. US. And 3.2 to 5.6 billion per annum on agriculture, water, infrastructure, and energy alone. Policy, they have committed to policies to reduce emissions by 22% by 2030. As compared to the business as usual. So business as usual is basically you don't care about climate change, like countries have done up to now. So you will see emissions still increasing, but not at the rate that they would at the business as usual rate. The most complete one, well, then South Sudan. South Sudan is interesting because you guys put out specific events in your NDC highlighting how climate change is affecting you. East African drought of 2011 resulted in famine, loss of life, and loss of livelihoods in South Sudan. Flooding in July to August 2014 resulted in the deaths, displacement of over 40,000 people, destruction of property, and the widespread malaria epidemic. In September 2015, flooding displaced 2,000 to 3,000 households. Again, this is copied out from your NDC. The costs are estimated that investment of over 50 billion is required for mitigation and adaptation across the sectors up to 2030. So this is more or less in line with the Kenya figure. And Tanzania is the most comprehensive one. They've done a study looking at how much it costs and what the impact is. So this is what came out. Tanzania has already experienced adverse impacts of climate change, costs in excess of 1% of GDP, and the frequency and occurs frequently, reducing long-term growth and affecting millions of people and their livelihoods. And then it said climate change projections in Tanzania indicate a consistent change in key climate variables, including warming from 0.5 in 2025 up to 40 degrees. I think that's wrong. That's a typo. In 2100, I think this should say 4. Oh yeah, you know why? Because when I copied, and this is meant to be that little 0 at the top. So it's 0.5 to 4 degrees in 2100. With more warming over the southwestern part of the country, mean seasonal rainfall is projected to decrease consistently and progressively for most parts of the country, but more significantly over northeastern highlands, where rainfall is projected to decrease by up to 12%. So you have a very already detailed plan outlining what the impact, or a detailed study outlining what the impacts will be to the different regions in your country. Currently, more than 70% of all natural disasters in Tanzania are climate change related. Again, came out of your report. Tanzania will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 10 to 20% by 2030, relative to the business as usual scenario. So this is your commitments. Implementation, you guys tell me. What do you guys think?
I have an interesting perspective. In a ministerial address given by the former Minister of Mining, he gave for Kenya that we are supposed to be setting aside a certain amount, which is 10% of our budget aside to this. And if you compare the two, it now becomes very. Our GDPs, the percentage of the GDP that we are targeting to get from extractives and the revenues that we are also targeting from the extractive does not really balance out. It brings a lot of opportunity cost analysis that we should do, but I don't think that.
Yeah. I mean, the big issue with climate change is that a policy that encourages you to use more fossil fuels. So if you get rid of it, then that will discourage the use of fossil fuels. And on the upper right-hand chart, you see the biggest subsidies of countries. And then on the lower chart, the biggest subsidies of renewables. And here, this compares the subsidies for renewables with subsidies for fossil fuels. So right now, we still have more subsidies for fossil fuels than for renewables, but the trend is relatively clear. Renewable subsidies are increasing, fossil fuel subsidies are decreasing. All this will have an impact on demand, okay? On demand. And impact on demand will have an impact on prices. And an impact on prices will have an impact on your revenues. Yeah. Big issues with solar and wind is intermittency. You only get energy when the sun shines or when the wind blows. So at night, if you rely on solar, you have a problem because there is no sun. Now the costs of batteries are falling very, very significantly. And that may address some of the storage problems. In the US now there is another storage issue.
And not transportation.
Well, I mean, if you look at Tesla and some of the other automobile sectors, and they're now rushing to move into the electric vehicle because they see that government policies will change very quickly, at least in the major markets, and they are changing. Like where I live in Norway, 70% of new vehicles are either hybrid or electric. They are being bought, and Norway is a bit of an exception. It's like the country that has incentivized most electric vehicles. But all these policies will have an impact on demand. So even if you don't have electric vehicles, it doesn't really matter because your amount of demand for oil and oil for the vehicle industry is, in global terms, is very, very small. So if the US, China, India, and Europe change electric vehicles, it's going to affect prices of oil. And that's what you as an oil exporting country care about, right? Carbon pricing initiatives. This is basically individual countries setting a price on carbon. This is the trend. It started with 2 in 1990, and in 2017, it went up to 43. China implemented the latest in 2017, so it says 42, but China already implemented it, now it's 43. This size here is the amount of carbon that is being emitted, so the share of global emissions. So right now, about 23% of the global GHG emissions has a carbon price on it. And the trend is rising. So I think it's not unfeasible to see this continuing to increase. What does it mean, a price on carbon? It means that oil, gas, and coal will become more expensive as related to other sources of energy, making solar and other products more economic viable. So these energies are already competing without subsidies in many of the markets, and this will, the carbon price will help them even further, right? Here you have the carbon price that is being charged by different countries. At the top you have Sweden with $131 per CO2 ton emitted. And then at the bottom, you have carbon price of $1, which is, it doesn't really make a difference. You may as well not have a carbon. These are some of the incentives of fuel switching. So this is what happened in Norway. They exempted import taxes on cars that are electric. They don't pay VAT. They don't pay toll roads. They are allowed to go on bus lanes. They have free parking and free charging all across the country. That's why 70% of people in Norway buy electric vehicles. Now they had to change the bus lane issue because the bus lane was busier than the non-bus lane because you have so many electric vehicles. So this change is real. In some countries you really see it. If you come to Norway, let me know and we'll go for a beer. But we'll also look at the amount of electric vehicles that are on the streets. And it may feel distant, but as I said, these changes in these big markets will have an impact on the price, on demand and on the price. These are emission controls. So a lot of governments are imposing emission controls on the car industry. You're probably familiar with the VW scandal in Germany. They cheated on their emission controls, which is very embarrassing as a German, but what do you know? And then you have initiatives to reduce flaring. Flaring of oil and gas is one of the main emitters. There is a nice little, if you go to Carnegie Endowments, you can see a map that shows at night where oil fields are being flared. And it's an interactive map, and it shows like where most of the flaring occurs across the world. Interestingly, a lot of flaring occurs in the US because of the fracking boom there. The World Bank has an initiative to reduce flaring significantly. Do you have flaring issues in your countries? Yeah? Flare all your gas. Have a look at what Angola did. They forced the oil companies to build an LNG facility, and now they export gas. So they actually reaped the benefit of trying to get the companies to make use of the gas, because flaring essentially is, gas is a valuable commodity, right? If you flare it, it's awful for the environment, but it's also not good for your revenue. So if you can get companies to come together, because normally you flare because it's not economical to use that in one project, right? But if you can merge projects, it may be economic. I don't know. This is what Angola is. I don't know if it's feasible in such. And then you have One interesting country that I've been working on quite a bit right now is Chile. And they call it the Saudi Arabia of the future because they have the best solar radiation. They have lithium deposits and they have copper deposits. And basically, if you go through a transition where more energy is produced by solar, wind, and other renewables, and you rely on electric vehicles, the demand for copper will shoot up. And lithium is obviously needed for batteries, right? So they're investing heavily in R&D to figure out how to benefit from that. What are the fossil fuel companies doing? They're probably going to get the brunt of what we're doing with the planet. Which to me is quite sad because I'm sure that every parent wants to leave a better world to their next generation than what we had. And most generations have done that, right? But I think we're probably the first one that's going to do this. They care about this. So if you want young people to come into your companies, you probably need to make 2 energy companies in 2017. And this is the trend over the years. So again, this is rising quickly. What are they asking? They're asking, look, I'm invested in your company. What is the risk associated with climate change to your business? If you're in the petroleum business and governments will change according to the Paris Agreement their demand for fossil fuel, what is the risk to your business? How do you address methane emissions? This is particularly relevant for gas. Gas leakages are methane. Methane, while it doesn't last as long as carbon, it's a lot more powerful than carbon. They asked to disclose lobbying. So as I mentioned in the US, a lot of lobbying is going on by the oil and gas industry for the US government not to change regulations or to take back regulations that Obama administration imposed on them. And it's working, right? Trump is getting rid of all the environmental regulations in the US. And the head of the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Authority, is a lobbyist for oil companies in the past. I mean, this is so absurd, this government. And then, what is your plan as a company for the energy transition? So, if you look at the disclosures of companies, they're disclosing their emissions. This is an example from BHP. This is an example from Statoil, which now is called Equinox or something like that. And their targets. These are the carbon prices that companies internally are putting on carbon. So when they decide to invest on a project, they do the model you guys did yesterday, and then impose an additional carbon price on between 3.27 and $80 to see what impact would a worldwide carbon tax have on these operations. Is this project still viable under carbon tax or not? When you do your sensitivity analyses for your projects, I would encourage you to also include a carbon tax and check, what does this mean? Is this project still viable if all the countries or Western countries impose a carbon tax? Some companies are outlining their transition. So Equinox again, so this is particularly relevant for the Tanzanians, right? Because you have Statoil. They're looking to, by 2030, to have about 15 to 20% in new energies. So moving out of oil and gas, and have 15 to 20% in new energies. Then the one big thing that the industry always talks about is that, no problem, if it gets really bad, we'll come up with solutions. And there is something called carbon capture and sequestration, where basically you take the carbon, let's say you build a power plant, a coal-fired power plant, and then you take the carbon from the chimney and pump it underground and store it, right? The problem is that at the moment, the economics haven't come down for years. So the costs haven't come down, the research hasn't advanced, and also people don't know if there is enough space underground to fill the carbon in, and whether it will erode back up. Because this is a gas essentially, right? So it may just bubble back up. So there are a lot of problems associated with carbon capture and sequestration. And in the past, if you look at scenarios that the UNFCCC has been given, in the past, a larger chunk was carbon capture and sequestration, and this has been decreasing over the years because they're realizing that we probably can't rely on carbon capture and sequestration to the extent that we thought we could. So the question is, what's real and what's greenwashing? You know that all these companies are changing their names. So as I said, Statoil changed their name to Equinor to show that they're not an oil company anymore, they're an energy company. Dom Energy changed their name to Ørsted. This is a Danish company. I don't know if you remember the BP when they went beyond petroleum. They got a lot of pushback from investors back in the years. And they changed it to a little flower because they're so green. But all companies are coming out with these risk analyses of their investments, and you can read them. So you have, for example, this one called Sky by Shell. And even ExxonMobil came out with one, trying to understand what impact this may have on their business. And if you're interested, you know, all these reports are out and online, so you can read them up. This is an example of a company that used to be an oil and gas company, and also produce energy. And this is their target to completely move out of oil, gas, and coal by 2023. And they already reduced their coal consumption by 73%. So there are some companies that are taking this seriously. It's not just Paul. Dong did it. And Equinor, I think, are not doing it to the extent necessary, but they're doing it. They're moving 20% of their business into renewables. You know, if I would have given this presentation 4 years ago, it would have all been pie in the sky talking. Now, there is real change in some economies and in some companies. So, you can't really see this in this meeting. Yeah. It's not yet clear, or most people haven't really figured out if it will just come back through up. If the geology and kind of the porosity of the rock, I mean, I'm not a geologist, so I don't understand this stuff, but that is a real issue. And the economics are not there. So if you, right now, a coal-fired power plant with carbon capture and sequestration is more expensive than solar and wind with battery storage. If the costs come down, then certainly I'm with you on carbon capture.
Now we are looking at where you have some space towards there is a reservoir, it was had a good impact.
And it may work, and there are, there are case studies in Norway. There are, you know, investments where governments are putting in a lot of money. There is the $1 billion fund of the oil industry that has put money into carbon capture and sequestration. But if you look at the costs of carbon capture and sequestration technology, it's not coming down. Whereas if you look at the cost of solar, wind, and battery, it's coming down at a rate where, you know, prices drop about 10% per annum. So if you play that out, then you come to the conclusion that in 10 years time, you know, we're going to be going the technology way of renewables with battery storage. But I think we probably need both, right? So what these are meant to show you is what is called the carbon budget. So the carbon budget sorry?
I was just talking to myself here, with all these statements.
You never had a landline network in Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe some of the cities, but you never had a landline. And you went to mobiles. I mean, the big opportunity of solar, I think, you know, back in the days, we relied on massive power plants and then a grid system, right? And the grid system often doesn't reach a lot of people that are rural. And you have a very rural community. I'm talking now, I'm generalizing a bit because some of your countries are obviously more populated than others, but just, I'm generalizing. So in Europe, we have everyone connected to the grid. But with solar, you can do mini grids. You don't need a massive power plant to connect a rural village in the middle of nowhere. We have an energy grid, but you probably won't have it. It's very, very similar to the mobile phone technology, right? We had this grid. You don't have it, but you're still benefiting from a new technology, which is telecommunications. And you go to the furthest village and someone has a mobile phone. You can transact money with mobile phones. I mean, I don't think you need to follow the same path of technologies that the developed or so-called developed countries have followed. If there are new technologies, you can jump some of these intermediate technologies that are suboptimal. Yeah?
What about the
Plus the 1.5 degree target. We will bust the 1.5 degree target. And at the current rate, we're nowhere near getting close to the 2 degree warming.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I've been battling with a question here.
Yes.
Maybe I don't know if you have a graph that shows the contribution of the various different contributors to climate change, including extractives. Because I've been thinking that even if we moved to solar and moved to other sources of energy, still climate change will be here. Actually, IPCC, I saw you used to have some slides from them.
Yeah.
In one of their reports, I think 2014, they admitted that you will have by 2100, climate change will be reversing. Temperatures continue to rise and things will continue to change. So what is this whole fuss about? Hey, stop coal, don't leave your oil in the ground, let's use renewables. What's the fuss about? I'd love to have for the contributors, other contributors to climate change.
So there are, you know, one of the first graphs I showed that showed which are the contributors to climate change. I can quickly go back to it.
Sorry to take you
South Sudan and Uganda, the host, and this time is brought to you by the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. Please, we are going to start with the anthems of the East Africa, and then the host country, the anthem of Uganda, and then we get into the discussion. We have here ministers from Kenya, from Uganda, and technical experts from South Sudan, as well as from the Ford Foundation. My name is Charles Odongso, and this program is brought to you right from here in Chobe Safari Road. Let's go for the anthem. Participants from the region, let's stand up and
our future in thy hands. United, free for liberty, together we'll always stand.
the East African anthem. Who wants to lead us, the East African anthem? Start by highlighting for us Honorable the main policy actions that
The Kenya legal framework is a broader framework that is drawn from our constitution. Our constitution envisages in chapter 5, articles 60 to 74, that mining and petroleum matters, which is broadly put under land, is a matter of national importance, and therefore should actually benefit the country and the citizens. So Kenya draws, in the next 2 years, we draw our aspirations from the Kenya Vision 2030, where we aspire to have a Kenya that is industrialized in the year 2030. And we draw this from the fact that economically we want to use minerals and petroleum discovery as a pillar that will spur economic growth in our country. We have also adopted the African mining vision that envisages a tripartite vision of supporting the investor, the government, and the communities. So within that framework, we've drawn a number of legislative actions. We have the National Upstream Petroleum Policy that is now being built to actually escalate it to a petroleum bill that has already gone through the National Assembly, and by next week, I think our Senate will pass that bill. At the midstream, we have policies that have created the Kenya Pipeline and the National Oil Corporation. We want to have a National Oil Corporation that is the pride of Kenya. Every country aspires to run affairs of petroleum and mining in their own country. So ours in this new policy is to create a Kenya Pipeline company that is very strong, a National Oil Corporation that will undertake midstream, downstream, and of course the upstream issues. I wanted to say something about the mining sector. People think it's petroleum that is big time. The potential is in mining. The potential we have in Africa, the potential in Kenya is not really petroleum. It's the deposits we have all over the country. Mining, with the Mining Act 2016 that Kenya is already operationalizing, we see Kenya contribute to the Vision 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's the voice of Honorable John Munyes, the Cabinet Secretary of Energy and Petroleum from Kenya. Let me go to from South Sudan, Dr. Cosmos Wani. He is a Chief Executive Officer of the Petroleum and Gas Commission. Doctor, give us the highlights of the policy instruments or arrangements that drive the extractives in South Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, participants, my colleagues, good morning. In South Sudan, just like I would say in Kenya, the constitution, what we call the transitional constitution of the Republic of South Sudan 2011, stipulated that there must be an act which controls the development of the mining sector as well as the petroleum sector. And indeed, in 2012, we produced the Petroleum Act of 2012, which has a number of provisions there. Among the key ones is the formation of the National Petroleum and Gas Commission. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow, I'll go briefly into its formation and so on. It was formed by a presidential decree, number 78 of 2012, on the 31st of October in 2012. The National Petroleum and Gas Commission is made up of 11 commissioners 3 of them are permanent members. The other 11 are part-time. They only meet whenever there is an issue to discuss. And the selection of these commissioners is strictly controlled in that you have the chairman, the deputy, and myself, the secretary. We are selected on merit and taking into account regional balance. And the other 8 members are selected as follows. 1 member from Land Commission, 1 member from the ministry, and by the ministry I mean the Ministry of Petroleum, and 1 member from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, 1 member from the ministry responsible for environment, 1 member from a recognized university in the country that deals with earth science. And the remaining 3 are from the oil-producing areas. They represent the oil-producing areas. So you could see that actually it's a broad-based group that is supposed to disseminate government policies as far as the petroleum management is concerned. The key functions of the commissioner are as follows: is to provide general policy direction, to act as a supervisory body as far as petroleum management is concerned, and most importantly, to approve all agreements between the government and the contractors. This is the body to approve it. We are an independent body, not really a body, we are independent, but part of the government. And the final mandate is to coordinate between government, the states, and other groups and people, NGOs and so on that are interested in the petroleum sector. So that's broadly what the Petroleum Commission is about. Then we have the ministry, which is responsible for the day-to-day running of the sector, and then which is responsible. Then we have the oil company, the national oil company, what we call NILPET. So these are the 3 bodies that actually run the world. One important law which has been passed, I think, as far as the petroleum sector is concerned is the Petroleum Revenue Management Act of 2013. This is very important because it states clearly where revenue from petroleum is taken, how it is divided, and how it gets down to the local communities. This is a very important act which I think we are very happy to have. Unfortunately, as you all know, South Sudan is at war. So most of these things really have not been implemented because of the war situation. So I would say that basically these are the important, this is the most important act, that the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, which if I have time, I will probably go into detail later.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. You can pass the microphone to the Minister, the host Minister from Uganda, Honorable Peter Lokeris, is State Minister for Energy and Minerals, and I think in charge of minerals itself, and no better person than yourself to give us your policy highlights that guide the sector in Uganda.
Thank you very much. I hope it is hard.
Yeah, you're on.
Thank you very much, moderator. My colleagues here, dear friends, you are most welcome to this country, the Pearl of Africa. I'm happy we're discussing about what is given to us by God. Nature is very generous and fair, that it has distributed these resources everywhere. And we have discovered that even we in Africa, we have abundance of these resources. And the issue is how to benefit out of this. First,
you must have some kind of guidance. And we are guided by the legal regimes of countries. In the Constitution of Uganda, all minerals on, in, underwater belongs to the ambit, they are under the province of the government of Uganda. Then there, we now make legislations. We have acts to this. In the mineral area, we have an act of 2003, which we are currently following. When we are following this, we have got other legal areas which we must observe when we are trying to access the minerals. The minerals in nature are capital intensive. You cannot say, especially in Africa, we can ourselves exploit this. And that's why we have developed what type of regimes that we should use to access this. In this country, we have followed the regime called production sharing agreement. In this, we envisage, because of the capital nature of extracting these resources, that there will be foreign companies which have the money. We have got the owner, which is government. We have got sub-owners who are the communities. So we made our law in such a way that when we want to admit our companies, we have what to tell them. That initially, when you are coming, you follow this kind of law. You file these activities in order for us to give you the licenses. So we have got a lot of licenses spelling out what the investor will take, what government will take, and how government will distribute this down to the communities. Because our legal regime is not centralized. It is decentralized. That is to say, there is central government, there are districts also, then there are communities. All these spells out how we are going to give the money to these people so that none is left out. That is in the minerals itself. When we are lucky, we also discovered there was oil in this country. We also made an act to that effect. We said, if you want to come and engage to extract this in the upstream, we have said this is what a foreign company will get, this is what government will get, and going permits downwards so that all of us are not left out. Of course, when you say we are now giving this in terms of royalties, our law says, especially oil, that the royalty starts from oil head. The moment you pump oil out, we measure. And this one, when we get it, we distribute to the central government, to the local government, and the districts in the law. But the districts are saying, our portion is very small. But we are saying, until we change the law, it is the law, because this thing is for everybody.
What is, do you mind telling us the portion? Is it 5% or 2% for the local?
Well, it is above that, but below 10.
So can we have a meeting point? 7.5?
To that, about 9. So this is what we are saying. But they are saying, why are you restricting us from using our money? What should be is the money, when we begin getting it, the royalty should go to local government. And local governments must make sure that what is left is kept in order that you bring into expenditure when you have made a budget. But one time I was with my brother here, and there was some joke by their parliamentarians. One said, the little money which is supposed to go to the people, it must be divided like relief food. That you have this, you eat also this, you eat also this. Then he stood up and said, what will be that mechanism? This is a finite property of everybody. You must have a lasting value for people, a school, and so on.
I'm going to come back to the nitty-gritties. Honorable Minister.
Yes,
Let me
thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I need to bring in Mr. Morris Makolo, who is a regional director for Ford Foundation in East Africa. How are you helping these governments? You oversee, for lack of a better word, the entire region, and you are interested in seeing good governance, in seeing, sustainable use of every resource and investment and all that. How are you helping these countries in the region to develop those policies?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good morning, participants. Unlike my fellow panelists that have already spoken, we are not a government, but we are partners to governments. The Ford Foundation is a philanthropic organization with headquarters in the US that has been operating both in the US and outside of the US since 1936. And the office that I currently preside over was opened in 1962. I mention these facts for very deliberate reasons. The fact that we have presence in other places around the world gives us the ability to bring into this region the lessons and experiences of other places. And we deem it as part of our responsibility to share those with the respective governments. I also mentioned 1962. You will all recall as students of history that these are the times that the governments of East Africa were being born. Tanzania 1961, Uganda 1962, Kenya 1963. In a sense, therefore, the Ford Foundation has had a front row seat as a witness to the country's progress, pains and gains over these years. And we have partnered over those particular years. But what has been the framework of our partnership? The Ford Foundation is a social justice foundation, meaning that it has aspirations that there can be better lives for different people. It has, as part of its mission, encouragement of international cooperation. It has, as part of its mission, the reduction of poverty. And we also encourage democratic growth and practice. How we have tried to do that is to take into the context in which some of these things are taking place. If you look at the geographies where these extractives are now found and are taking place, you have a perfect case of what Jesus would describe in the Bible about the stones that the builders rejected that have become the cornerstones. Because these are geographies that have historically been marginalized. The investments in those regions have been very poor. The investment in education, in infrastructure, and in everything. And yet now they represent the hopes of these nations. As part of our mandate is to ensure that the governments really act in ways that these resources become a blessing and not a curse. And we help them by, among other things, building the technical skills of the people that are in charge of those particular departments. We help by encouraging collaboration and conversations across borders. And our visit this particular time is part of a conversation between our respective Ministry of Petroleum and Mining of Kenya and Energy and Minerals of Uganda as part of that learning exercise. Lastly, it's really about encouraging conversations and partnerships between governments and civil society, because we believe that the process of developing a country is a collaborative effort. And what we have really are common goals, albeit differentiated responsibilities. And in different ways, we hope to be making progress over the years for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Makolo. Finally, on the panel, let me bring in Mr. Godbert Mushabe. He is the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies and has been at the forefront of organizing this training the last 2 weeks that the participants from the region have been here. I want to get from you a context of this training. What's the benefit? Why Chobe Safari Lodge? Why this part of the region? Yeah. Any person talking about spending money would have said maybe Nile Hotel, Serena, Munyonyo in the city. Why here? And what is the benefit to the
region? And salutations to the rest of the colleagues on the panel and our participants. Let me make just 4 quick points in relation to what you've asked. One is that Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies is an organization that believes in the power of knowledge and technology to transform societies. We believe that as a continent, we really have to invest in building institutions that spend more time and resources in generating knowledge and producing evidence to support governments in developing policies and setting policy priorities. And therefore, this training is part of that process, and we are privileged to be supported by the Ford Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation in this endeavor. Secondly, we are particularly interested in extractives because this continent is one of those continents that are really endowed with immense natural resources. The wealth on the ground and under the ground that we have as a continent is really, it's unmatched by any other region probably. Maybe the Middle East can claim of oil. But I think for us, we have minerals, we have oil, as the ministers alluded to here. And therefore, as an institution, as an institute that is focused on knowledge generation, our belief is that these resources can be harnessed in a manner that is beneficial to all the stakeholders, the different stakeholders, the governments that have to collect taxes and to invest in developing their communities, the private sector that are interested in making money, the communities that live and have nurtured these resources as they exist. And therefore, for you to be able to do that, you need to be able to really create a conversation that happens. Because right now, if you look across this region, there are developments going on, there's exploration going on, there are several conflicts that are emerging. In Uganda here, the participants had some of the conflicts that have been that have emerged in the areas of Mubende over gold, in Rwamutonga over land, and many others across the region. Dr. Wani here talked about Sudan is at war. These are resources that can be harnessed to transform these societies, and therefore part of what we are doing here is to try to bring the different actors, the different practitioners across the spectrum of our society to be able to have a conversation and say we can harness these resources in a manner that is beneficial. We don't have to fight over them, and we don't have to try to rig anybody out of the system. And finally, one of the things that we are trying to do here is to create a network of practitioners, both in terms of faculty, people who are resource persons, they come and facilitate these trainings, but also in terms of participants, that we can develop a network of practitioners across the region that believe that actually these resources can be harnessed for the benefit of our countries and our communities. And that's why we are doing this training. That's why we bring people from across industry, across governments, civil society, academia, and the media. And yes, we chose to come to Chobe because, one, in Chobe you really feel the richness of this country.
Is the oil felt from around here?
No, actually, part of the emphasis, I think Minister Munyes talked about it, that the big deal here may not even be oil. The big deal may be minerals. And I think for this region, the big deal is also the biodiversity that we have, that is surrounding us here. That whatever we do, we cannot afford to destroy this resource called biodiversity, because the oil and the minerals will be exhausted. The biodiversity, we can maintain it here. And of course, having this training at the fringes of the Nile and looking at the volumes of water running away to Egypt, that also reminds us actually that there is a lot we can do with this water before it escapes to Egypt.
Thank you. That's interesting. Right from what Godba has said, I'm going to bring in the participants because these are experts in their own right, from the different regions, the academia, from the legal profession and all that. But I wanted to make a follow-up, to make comparisons from the region and the good practice. I want to make a follow-up from an important perspective, the issue of royalties. Honorable Munez, how have you catered for the issue of royalties in your policy, in your law? The Honorable Minister Lokeris talks about something between 5 and a little more than 5, but less than 10. And I know that the discussion is still going on in this country. How is Kenya doing it, especially that you have a new constitution, so maybe newer, better practices? Do you want to share with us if you don't mind?
Yes, I don't mind.
Go for it.
Yeah. Royalties are enshrined in our constitution. As I said, the constitution envisages resources benefiting the state and the communities. In the Mining Act 2016, we've identified a chapter on royalties. So the country has already operationalized that royalty policy. I'm afraid to say in Kenya, after passing the Mining Act, we drew 14 regulations. The only regulation that is still pending is the royalties regulation.
So it is controversial?
Not controversial. We've gone ahead to discuss it with the stakeholders. It's gone through Parliament. We've already identified the ratios. The ratio is 70% for national government, 20% for what we call the county governments, regional governments we have, and then 10% is for the host community. Where minerals are domiciled, we try to identify how to support them by giving them 10%. This policy is with the Ministry of Treasury. I want to assure Kenyans and everybody listening that in the next 1 month, this will be a matter of the past. We will have passed this regulation. We will have collected so much money. I know one region which is owing about 1 billion shillings. We will start distributing these resources to Kenyans. Kenyans are waiting for the royalty fees. I know it's going to actually to stimulate the investor confidence. Because the challenge in Kenya now is people are saying, where is our money?
Yes.
Why do we accept investors? But the moment I start disbursing this money, I'll see a lot of appetite from the public who want now to give land that has been a problem for our investments.
We're going to touch on the appetite because not just for land, but also for people who want to line their pockets. People like some of you on this table who are in charge of managing the resources and who access it faster than the community. But just a quick follow-up. When you say county governments, do you mean that the 20% is going to be added onto the budget that you give to support the decentralization? Is that what you are saying?
Yes.
Or it will go to the county where the minerals are based?
The county is not like our counties.
Yes, I know.
There is a region.
Exactly, I know. The 47 or 48, are they 47 or 48?
47 counties.
Yes.
So this amount will go, assuming you discovered gold in County X, say Turkana.
Yes.
So the ratios will be 70 for national government. We will send 20 to Turkana to be legislated by the Turkana County Assembly so that we identify the priorities of the region. Then the 10% now will directly go to the host community. Again, we also want to legislate that so that somebody doesn't say what the minister said, that we want ours under some anger and safety net program.
Okay, I want to come to the minister actually after those clarifications, because I think the issue that Godba talked about for me is very enticing to the ear, and especially to those who are watching us, because this resource is there. And the honorable, my minister, let me say that because he's the minister for this country, he talked about government being the owners. And someone out there might be saying, but who is government? What is government? The people are the government. And so you're giving the owners only something between 5 and 10, and something amorphous called government. I want him to be the one to answer. Something amorphous called government says we shall take the 90 and O plus. Honorable Minister, from your colleague, Honorable Munez of Kenya, I know that their constitution, in a beneficial manner, came at a time when they were already starting production, and so they could, put it in the constitution. But ours came earlier than when we started some of this exploration. So do you think that Kenya has maybe better policies that we can learn from as a country, or you think that ours doesn't need any improvement?
Thank you very much. There are two acts there. There is one responsible for minerals, and there is a new one for oil and gas. Yeah. So for minerals, royalties, 80% to central government. Central government means all of us as a country. These people which is called government. So when they say 80%, it is divided to even those who don't have through their structures, all right, for development. That is it. Then 20% goes to districts. So when it goes to districts, 10 is for the district, 7 is for the sub-county, 3 is for the owner of the land, or if it is a community, it's a community. Like in Karamoja, we don't have titles, so it comes to us. Then we go to oil. This is also having royalties. Because when you get royalties, this goes to, that is about 90 goes to central government. Then we have 10 to the districts and below. Then also, when you are doing that, we also allow people and companies, encourage them to carry out what they call their corporate social responsibilities, build the schools, build dispensaries, and they have done it somewhere. So my friend Oriem of here, where we are now seated, was saying, how oil, in fact the oil is just in here across, it is here. My wells are here. I said, if you people had asked me, because they need clearance, and you wanted to visit them, I would ask him, because I'm here and he's there, so we would clear you to go, since he's not there. So these people, we have got them, the wells are in the park. Now they are saying, how about who is supposed to get the social corporate responsibility who are far away there? So as we shall continue, we shall ask the people to go and give social responsibility to the people, not to the animals. Because you own all this land. You are the ones who have given to the companies. So that's what we are going to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is more elaborate.
Yes, this is now more elaborate.
By defining 10% and then you have 7% for the
district, I mean 10 district, 7 sub-county.
This is very elaborate.
Yeah, that's what I wanted, and it's important for us. Honorable, Dr. Cosmas from South Sudan. I just want a clarification on one. You talked about the issue of you referred to the issue of the current war situation in South Sudan. But we also know that the issue of these natural resources were part of the big discussions when South Sudan was becoming independent of Khartoum. And what's the development now? Are we now agreeable as South Sudan that this is what is for South Sudan people, and this is how we have solved the people of Khartoum and their demand, and now we are fine to move forward. If the war situation, as the peace talks are going on, if the war situation cools down.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. First of all, let me set the background for petroleum in Sudan, as it were. Petroleum was discovered in 1997 in Sudan, and production immediately started. At that time, the north and the south. Yeah? And the policy of the Khartoum government was to extract the resource as quickly as possible with complete disregard for the communities and the environment. Absolutely, they don't care. They want the oil out, they want to sell it to prosecute the war. That was the policy. And when we became independent, of course, I have already spoken about the laws that we have put in place now. In terms of the revenue, what the government now has done is to create, it states that all receipts from petroleum resources must go into the Bank of South Sudan in an account called the Petroleum Revenue Account. That must go there, all of it, whether it's the sharing from the sharing agreement, from royalties, or from bonuses, it must all go there. When it gets there, then every year, the government must suggest or will propose a certain amount to be put into what we call the consolidated fund. The consolidated fund, the job of the consolidated fund is to meet the government budgetary requirement. And whatever the government is decided to do that year, development projects and whatever it is. So that goes there, salaries and so on. It goes into the budgetary requirement. Part of that money, the consolidated fund, will go to the producing states. And another part of that money, the consolidated fund, will go to the communities that where the oil is found. Of course, from the petroleum revenue account, we have now removed the consolidated fund. The balance now goes to what we call the petroleum revenue savings fund.
Do you have some figures for this?
We don't, because somehow it depends on the country's budgetary requirement, year to year. The Ministry of Finance will probably know the details, but that is split in that way. And then,
but do you see that as a problem from your two colleagues from from Uganda and Kenya, that where there is no known formula for distribution, there could be a problem with that? Do you see that?
I don't see a problem there, because it's whatever remains stays in what we call the Petroleum Revenue Savings Fund. The Petroleum Revenue Savings Fund again is split into two. One is what we call the Stabilization Fund, and this is to cater for changes in production in case it goes down or something like that, or in case of price fluctuations, where somehow the price has gone low, as we know, in the last few years. Then this fund can be used to meet the other budgetary funds. The other bit goes to what we call the Future Generation Fund. And this is supposed to be meant for our future children and grandchildren that we use.
Is there any cash on the Future Generation Fund?
Yeah, it is. At the moment, because of the war situation, I'm not sure, but the Minister of Finance will give you.
Okay, thank you so much.
But let me just say one thing, that this Future Generation Fund must not be drawn for at least 5 years.
So every 5
must not be drawn from the start of operations. It must not be drawn, and it's actually supposed to be invested.
Okay.
And
okay. Thank you so much. I want us to. We are going for a very short break, but before we go for that break, allow me announce the Twitter handles that you can join us on through. There is Uganda at SRI_Uganda. Then you can also use at Gliss in capital _East Africa, EA, at Gliss _EA, and then at NBS TV. You can also use at Godbert Tumushabe. The G and the T should be in capital, at Godbert Tumushabe. And then you can also use at Sharp Mugabe. And then you can also use my Twitter handle at C Odongso, and send your questions, your comments. We are coming to you through NBS, but live from Chobe Safari Lodge, and this discussion on policy issues regarding the extractives and sustainable investment in East Africa. We have the minister from Kenya, minister from Uganda. We have a technical person, the CEO of the commission from South Sudan, and also the person from Ford Foundation, as well as Gliss, and a multitude of participants coming from different professions, the academia, of course, and the legal profession, policy and decision makers, and they are all here. When we come back, we are going to start taking in your comments, the conversations coming from out there, as well as getting comments from the participants who are in this room. Let's go for that break, and we'll be right back in a bit. From the academia, from the legal sector, as well as for administrators, policymakers, and implementers in the various governments. We also have the minister from Kenya in charge of petroleum and mining, cabinet secretary they call him, and is John Munyes. We have Honorable Peter Lokeris, State Minister for Energy and Minerals from Uganda. We have from South Sudan, Dr. Cosmos Wani. By the way, he studied all his life in Uganda before going back to South Sudan, and he's the CEO of the Petroleum and the Gas Commission, so he knows Uganda very well. We have Mr. Morris Makolo, who is the Regional Director for Ford Foundation in East Africa. And lastly but not least, on the panel, we have Mr. Godbert Tumushabe, who is the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, known as Gliss in brief. I'm now going to bring in the participants out there, you who is joining us through Facebook or through Twitter. I've already mentioned the contacts through which you can get to us your comments and your questions. But allow me now bring in the participants, the experts who are in the room here and who are drawn from all over the East African region. I don't know who is going to be the first. Make a comment or ask a question. You will tell us your name and where you're coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have the privilege to make the first comment with respect to the policy directions, as you have been advised already by the Honorable Minister, regarding the royalties on extractives. My comment is simple. In discussing this issue, we need to restructure the royalty narrative, put it into context, especially when it comes to practical realities. We have already been informed that almost invariably, different countries have the royalty provisions embedded not only in policy, but also in legislation. However, you will notice that there is mention of percentages. Therefore, there is need in a way of managing public expectations to dig deeper and ask the question, when we talk about 3%, 3% of what? Because you might be potentially be talking about something that is very small. We also appreciate that these royalties are embedded in arguments. We can give an example of petroleum royalties, whereby within the argument you have the company paying royalty as a certain percentage of production per day, which cascades into different tranches depending on how the level of production is going, either quarterly or yearly. So it means that you cannot be exactly sure how much money that will be. Now, my recommendation would be that in order to manage public expectations, we need to orient our discussions towards encouraging people to benefit through other means instead of having a lot of expectation on royalty. Other means would include productive means whereby people are encouraged to participate within the business through the supply chain. Because you notice that when companies are investing money, which eventually they recover through agreed mechanisms in the production sharing agreements, most of this money invested is through services and goods, through purchasing.
Okay.
So the biggest point really for our people should be to encourage them to see how we can capture that big chunk of the money as opposed to relying on when royalties will come, with the potential that the percentages may escalate in two figures that
Brilliant. That's important. That context is very important, and I'll be coming back to the ministers on what they are doing. But I think the point that Godba made, that the conversation continuing, I think addresses that to some extent. In these conversations, what are the issues that are being discussed? I think those are some of the issues, clarifications that should be coming up in the conversations that should be sustained. Let's take the lady just behind there. It's on.
Thank you very much, Director, and also the Golda. My question is directed to my Honorable Minister. My name is Melissa Agena from Uganda, and I would like to hear from you. I want to know your concerns about private sector. How are you empowering private sector to supply the oil and gas industry? Because particular articles in the production sharing agreement only reserve the privilege of training to government officials. But these are not people going to bid, and they're not part of the national supplier database. And I'm afraid that we're going to be outcompeted by foreign companies. So are you taking that into consideration as well? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Agena. There is a hand here. Let's finish the ones in front and then we'll go behind.
Thank you very much, moderator and the panelists. I have two questions. One, I'm Norbert from Combat University, so I'm representing academia. One of the challenges that the extractives in East Africa are facing is the limited manpower and even the capacity gaps. What steps have the governments in the bloc taken to ensure that they address this issue, and also to foster the research and innovation? That's one. Two, this goes specifically to my minister from Uganda. We are hearing the airport is under construction, pipeline activities are in high gear, refinery agreements are being made, but at the same time, we are hearing that the final investment decision is yet about to be taken. So, the question is, if the final investment decision is taken and these projects are not part, or they are also part of the final investment decision, please clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the Honorable Minister Lokeris here. And then we'll go the other side.
Thank you. I appreciate you all for your presentation, for your preliminaries leading this conversation. I'm Tito Magoti from Tanzania. I work with the Dvd Human Rights Center, HRC. One thing I'd like to hear from the ministers and our technical person from Sudan. I recognize that we are hungry of development, but these huge development which we are foreseeing or which we are aspiring to arrive at, they have some other costs which can lead to infringement of some other people's rights once we have not put in place ensure responsible behavior for corporations or for business entities. And there are guidelines in place for East Africans to ensure that we have responsible behavior in business. And I would like to know if there are any guiding tools or guiding principles which the East African can make reference in conducting business, so that we can have both human rights secured and development captured. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tito from Tanzania. Oh, the hands have grown many now. Let's get the lady, and then we come to the gentleman.
Thank you. You took it off from the liabilities, and I missed the part of the signature bonuses from Uganda. Could we be having a policy regulating the signature bonuses? You know, I would want to know more about how we spend that money when it comes in. Then I also want to hear more from the Honorable Minister from Kenya. Yes, a number of policies have been taking place for policy reforms. How gender inclusive are these reforms? That also goes to my minister. How are we catering for the women under these reforms? Are there any particular, benefits for the women? Any particular articles? I would want to know more about that.
Thank you so much, Irene. Let's take the gentleman in blue, in the blue shirt.
Thank you so much, moderator. My name is Dara. I come from South Sudan. The protocol of sitting is in place. I would like to acknowledge that Honorable Munoz have been my MP from, because I stayed in Uganda district for quite a long time.
There is no problem if you have dual citizenship. Don't worry.
So, sir, I'm a product of Kakuma. Thank you. That one is acknowledged. When it comes to questions, since we began this workshop, the industry seemed to be bothered by one thing. The extractive industry itself is an industry that must compromise some of the elements in the process. But when I see there are a lot of obstacles in the middle before you start it. So we are blessed by two ministers and the body that these things should be put into consideration. Now with the rise of the civil society, the community empowerment, and the government taking the oil industry, how will you manage to manage the industry, putting into consideration all of this? For example, the issue of land in a oil area. When we talk of land, we may mean the Turkana land. We may mean any other land that oil is coming from. So how will the government put these modalities together to take them, take the country benefit and the community right?
Okay.
How will the government put this together? Number two.
Thank you, Gara.
1 minute.
You have already asked two.
The issue of local citizens, because I'm also bothered by one thing. There are citizens who have land in the oil area, and there are citizens who are settling in the oil area. So you as a government, how do you address these issues? Because once the oil is found in that area seems to be a place for all.
You mean a conflict between the local, indigenous local people and those who are just coming in?
And other local people who stay in Kampala. Because there are other local people who stay in Kampala, and there are local people who stay in the local area. So these two local people.
So they are locals, and then they are local people. Okay, thank you. That has been noted. But let's try to maximize it. 1 minute for each person, or less is even better.
Okay. All protocol observed, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have two short questions for the Ugandan minister and the Kenyan minister. Honorable Lokeris, I recall around March of this year, a statement was issued by the Ministry of Energy indicating that a deadline had been set for end of June to finalize the host government agreement for the East African crude oil pipeline. While we all look forward to the final investment decision for oil development, we also understand that finalizing the host government agreements will be a key consideration. And I wanted to hear from you whether you now have in mind a clearer position when the negotiation will be concluded, and whether you're also taking steps to fast track. Then Honorable Munez, the Kenya Oil and Gas Association in the past has been having some challenges around tax issues. Given that the 5 years ever since the VAT legislation was passed lapsing on 3rd of September, unless the VAT regime is revised a bit, as the Oil and Gas Associations have been contending, they feel that future exploration activities are likely to be affected because they are likely to incur a bit of VAT on some of the activities that they're going to undertake. So the question I wanted to get from you is whether you have any intentions of engaging further with the oil industry together with Honorable Rodriguez so that you solve their issues and have the industry go forward.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Thank you so much. My name is Moses. I work for Strategic Response International. My question goes to my Honorable Minister of State for the sector we are discussing today. Honorable Minister, I have come to appreciate that this field needs, first of all, transparency and accountability. In 2016, after a thorough case with Uganda, the president of this country authorized the payment of 6 billion to officials that represented this country. On 19th January of the same year, a committee of parliament was given authority to search and understand the payment of that. After that, the same committee came with various recommendations that would be good for accountability and transparency in this field. Most importantly was to come up with a law in 90 days that would regulate such awards that would affect the sector. Honorable Minister, I would be very happy to get an update on as far as fulfilling those recommendations is concerned.
Thank you, Moses. Let me have that and the lady last in this segment, and then I'll come back for the second segment starting from that side. But let's please keep the question shorter. Time.
Thank you. My name is Noah Shio from Tanzania. My question goes to the gentleman from Ford Foundation. I'd like to ask a very short question. How we've seen that for the past 2 weeks where we plan different policies and laws across the East Africa region, a lot of issues are a bit similar, though there are some significant differences between maybe Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan, particularly when it comes to issues of land. I can see in Kenya they have what we call private ownership of land, and where the Honorable Minister has mentioned clearly that there is that division between the local community where the resources are found and the central government. While in Tanzania the case is a lot different. I mean, the land is owned by the government, and we don't have that local content at the local. Our local content is based on the national level, where if resources is found in a certain area, the revenues are supposed to be distributed equally among the entire nation to avoid inequalities that may be brought up by these revenues in a certain particular area where the resources are found and not.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. To the next person.
But I didn't get the question really.
The question is, what is Ford Foundation doing to try and harmonize the policies and the legislation at the ministerial level? Now that we have the ministers here, what is Ford trying to do to make sure that we have harmonized policies to attract investments in our areas?
Or are you doing anything at all anyway? Yes. Lastly for this round, and then I'll come for the second round from the participants.
Thank you. My name is Esther Somi from Tanzania, and I'm one of the people who believes in knowledge and technology being one of the things that will benefit not only the hospital of the state, but I'm more concerned with the community because I went around the community. So my question is, because we have ministers here, we all know that we live around the communities which are not
Thank you, thank you. Let me have, and then there is a question that has come from Kenneth.